Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Unbound with me, Nicola Humber, author of Unbound and founder of the Unbound Press. This is a weekly series of conversations with different magical women who are walking their own unbound path. And I like to just have this conversation and to see what magic wants to emerge, because each one has their own unique essence and their own unique take on how to lead a more unbound life. So today I am joined by the gorgeous Shasta Townsend, who is best-selling author of Happy Sexy Shameless, which is just an incredible book. Go and check it out. And I wanted to speak to Shasta because Shasta's work, it's all about the connection between intimacy and how when we can bring more intimacy into our lives and our relationships, that has a really expansive effect on the success and the income that we can create as well. So welcome, Shasta.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and all the work that you're doing in the world too, Nicola. It's so inspiring.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm excited to dive in and see what wants to come through in our conversation. So I usually start, Shasta, because obviously the theme of these conversations is unbound. That's what all of my work is about. And how we unbind ourselves from these stories and beliefs that have kept us restricted in the past. So I'm wondering whether there's a particular area of your life or a situation where you felt particularly bound in the past and how you kind of freed yourself from that.
Yeah, I mean, I love this theme. I love this idea of being unbound, and such perfect timing in our culture right now. You know, for me as a woman, the aspect that really comes to mind is that I have been shamed, for lack of a better word, shamed about having clarity, desire, passion, even sexuality. And that happened when I was really, really young. You know, I remember I was a very clear, outspoken young girl, high levels of clarity on who I was. And I remember playing Foursquare, for those of you that remember that game. I was probably in grade 3 or 4. And I guess I also have an aspect where I like things, you know, fairness was always important to me. And I remember playing Foursquare, and one of the boys who was supposed to be out wouldn't go out. And I said, hey, it's not your turn. It's Sandy's turn, or whomever. And I remember him saying, "You are just a stupid bitch anyways." And it was, I mean, you're like 7 or 8, right? And at that point, like, your brain also isn't in a space where you're discerning and releasing things. And, you know, I know it sounds like a kids can be cruel kind of comment, but I got to tell you, like, I kind of held on to that unconsciously for a long time in my life, and really had this subconscious belief as a woman that I was too much, that I was a bitch, that it wasn't safe for me to be expressed in my intelligence, to be expressed in my desire, to be expressed in my sexuality, to be expressed in, you know, all areas of my life. Even though I still moved forward, still had success in my life, there was always an edge around that. And of course, then I unconsciously chose male partners who would reiterate that same message. And even in my business, you know, early on in my career, I would expect that people would think I was a bitch about something just because I was clear or I was intelligent. And it's really interesting because it's been a journey over the last, you know, decade really, of actually seeing there's power in being, you know, a magnetic, sexual, sensual woman, and to really switch up my own internal story to heal that. And now to be a voice and an advocate for women standing in whatever authentic expression of themselves. You know, it doesn't have to fit any particular mold, but to really be that model the best that I can, and to encourage women to do the same. So it's when I think about being unbound, it goes all the way back to probably being 7, maybe even earlier in my life, and the belief that as a woman I was quote unquote, too much.
Yeah.
And so and I think I see a lot of women with that story, with this belief that we're not allowed to be powerful, successful, outspoken. So yeah, that's my that's my story.
It's really interesting because I can identify a story like from a similar age, and I think around the age of kind of 6 or 7, obviously when we're very young, we are kind of soaking up all of these kind of,
Totally.
beliefs about how we should be in the world, kind of subconsciously we're picking them up. But I think when we get to the age of kind of, 6 or 7, when we're a little bit more aware, but we're not quite able to completely process what's going on around us, it's a very vulnerable age, isn't it? And we can really take on these stories. And yeah, I definitely had an experience at school around the same time where I took on this belief that it wasn't safe to express myself and kind of shut down from that point on. So it's really interesting that you've got a story from around that age. And I was going to ask, Shasta, you talk about, that idea of being too much, like you say. I think it comes up for women a lot. And often there can be the idea that we're too much and not enough at the same time. And it's like, what on earth do you do with that? So how did you come to the kind of realization that this had been running kind of underneath for a long time, this idea that you were too much, or people would think you were a bitch, which again, I think a lot of women can identify with. How did you identify that and recognize that it had been holding you back from expressing yourself fully?
I think 2 things really happened in my life. One was in my mid-20s, I had a very successful corporate career, but I really was on the edge of a nervous breakdown. I was extremely unhappy. I was extremely unhealthy. And what happened at the time is 2 things happened. These are like these sort of like come to Jesus moments when you're like at the dark night of the soul, as we've all heard. Yeah. And I was like, something's got to change. Like, I cannot go on like this. And I was actually in a relationship, and I was engaged to be married, and he was so the wrong guy. Like, it was just like, I would throw up thinking about actually marrying this person. Like, I was just so living the wrong life. And I, at the time, had really bad back pain, of course. And I went to see a chiropractor, and these people that are like angels in your life that you don't even know. And I didn't know this man. And he said to me, basically, you need to get your shit together, girl. There's nothing wrong with your back. You need to really take a look at your mind. And that was the first time in my life, honestly, I was about 24, 25, where someone said, you have to consider your own internal stories. And he said, have you ever done meditation or yoga? And I was like, no, I'm not doing that, right? Like, I was like this super A-type personality, but I started going to yoga. And what happened is I discovered really a divine feminine spiritual path. And what was interesting for me, I grew up in a family that really were atheists, so we didn't have a lot of spiritual or religious, but that exposure to this divine feminine path. And what I saw for one of the first times in my life is a model of a goddess who was strong and sensual and outspoken, and in fact was revered for that. I studied the Hindu goddesses, and that was a big switch for me. It started to open up something in my brain. So, regardless of what people's religious or spiritual practices are, I think seeing models, it's also why this is so important to me. I know it's important to you too, Nicola, to be that living model the best we can. It started to open a belief, or like these imaginal cells of like, okay, I don't have to be this quiet, demure, wall-to-wall carpeting model, which is what I grew up with. My mother was very much like that. And it started to open a new potentiality at the same time, because I was kind of burning my life to the ground. and I knew something had to change, and we're kind of like unconsciously competent, we don't really know what we're doing, but we know we're doing something. And that's when I actually entered into an intimate relationship with the man who's now my husband. And he was a drastic change from the man I had normally accepted or attracted in my life. And for the first time in my life, there was a man who was saying, I love the strength. I love the power. I love the clarity. I want this. I'm not intimidated by this. And I know that was a reflection of a shift in me, which then meant I could attract, and be in a relationship with someone like that. So it started an opening. It started this conversation in my brain. I'm going to be 44. I'm 44. So that was about 20 years ago that I started this path. And the decision, honestly, is that I consciously then, and especially in the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years, said, I am going to consciously, lovingly transform any of these beliefs into power in my life, into something juicy, and that it doesn't have to be such hard work. But it really was that opening of the possibility that as a woman, I didn't have to fall into these old, outdated paradigms, which we all know are outdated, but there's still that kind of like internal misogynistic message, and that willingness to really confront it, I think, in myself was the opening. And frankly, I just was in so much pain. Like I couldn't imagine another 40 years living like I was. So that was, pain is often the instigator for most of us, but yeah, that's really how the shift started to happen for me.
Exactly. Yeah. Like you say, that happens for a lot of us. Again, that's something that happened for me. Not until later in my life. I was kind of in my mid to late 30s when I kind of had that dark night of the soul. And I'm really struck by what you said. Off there. This often happens.
There we go.
Here we go.
Technology.
This often happens, Shasta, during these conversations, because when you get two like magical, powerful women together,
we're shutting down the patriarchy.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, how can we shut them down? We're back. I was struck by what you said about when you met your now husband and being in a relationship with somebody who was actually kind of encouraging, who didn't feel intimidated by your strength and by you being fully expressed, and encouraged that and invited that. And as you were speaking about that, it made me think about when I first kind of met my husband, and it's very similar. There's a lot of similarities in our paths, as there always tend to be. But actually, I found that quite strange, and it's so unfamiliar at the beginning. And even now, sometimes the fact that, he can be with all of me, it can be, I don't know. We get so used to people not being able to hold us like that and to kind of accept and encourage all of who we are. It can feel that sense of like unfamiliarity, certainly at the beginning, even discomfort in a way. Does that make any sense at all? That we're so used to something else. Yeah.
I think the thing, for women that are listening to this, it's like, there's no great men out there, and I'm only meeting these like jerks or these guys that are insecure. And here's the thing, like whether we want to admit this or not, we're creating all of our reality. So if we have that all men are assholes, or they're not going to be able to hold us in that power, that's exactly what we're going to get. We are creating our results, whether we want them or not. A lot of the work that I do with women is often excavating these unconscious beliefs, that we have about ourselves, and to really learn how to take radical responsibility for what we're thinking about. And part of it is very much what you said, Nicola, is like this expectation that we are going to be rejected, this expectation that they're going to be intimidated, this expectation that men can't meet us in this place. And it's completely false. Is it true that there's some work that men need to do out there? Of course course, same for women. But the models of, and the experience that you have, that I have, that so many women are intentionally, kind of like creating. And there's no question that when I stepped into a relationship with Ian, like it challenged some of my deepest stuff. And I actually think that's why relationship is so juicy, like this, he was my mirror of like, you're not going to get away with that anymore, sister. And not out of judgment, but really out of a deep place of love. And I really feel like my marriage, my relationship with my husband has been one of the biggest challenges of my life, but also really one of the richest places of growth. But a lot of it, just to come back, is I think as women, it's this conscious awareness of whose thoughts are coming into my brain, where are they coming from? And, we're really in a time and culture right now where we need to make some shifts in our decisions. We need to make some shifts in how we're showing up in the world. We need to make some shifts in who we're being, and even our ideas about who we're allowed to be as women, what men are, how men are going to meet us, and to really be conscious. That's why I love your work and everything that you're doing, because it's this conscious conversation now. And what's interesting is I often see this swing from women going, as I did at one point, like I was like, I'm not going to be wall to wall carpeting like my mother was. So I became this like really like, don't mess with me kind of, total independent go-getter woman that actually left me really lonely and really sad, frankly. And it, for me, has been this journey of how do I hold femininity and feminine power while at the same time really allowing myself to be loved. And that's our birthright, and there is, as you said, an unfamiliarity around that. But it's time to make it familiar, and it's time to say like, no, I'm not settling for this anymore. I want to be in powerful relationship with myself and others, and with my lover, man or woman, whomever it is. But it's, I'm appreciating your story because it's so true. And it's so many women that I talk to that they're like, I'm so friggin' uncomfortable, opening myself up to this person. And I'm like, totally, it is so friggin' uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And, Ian and I have been together for 20 years, and there's still moments, Nicola, where I'm like, oh shit, old story, there's my mother, or there's my father, or whatever. And I have to be like, no, like this is coming back to truth. And I think that's why, again, having these conscious conversations, having a mentor, having somebody that can really call you on your stuff so that we can have these beautiful relationships, we can have this full experience as a woman. That's what we were meant to have, I believe. And I know, like, I can't imagine my life, if I had continued on the track that I was on. I just can't even imagine where I'd be now. So I'm really grateful for the pain and the struggle and the willingness to go through it, as you did too.
Yeah, exactly. And I love everything about what you're saying there. I'm just recognizing, at times, even now, I find kind of my old stories creeping in, or an old pattern. And actually, Mark, my husband, is very good at calling me on that and spotting it. And sometimes it drives me insane. It's like, look, I just want to be in this old stuff for a while. But, that is the challenge, actually, of being in relationship with somebody, being in this conscious relationship, is that you are called really to be your fullest, freest self, and not to slip back into these old patterns. So, I think it can be immensely challenging, but also incredibly expansive as well. So thank you for talking about that. And I want to talk some more about intimacy. And I love the way that you connect intimacy with it's like success, and whatever success means to the individual, and the way that we're able to create more money and attract more money into our lives as well. So can you speak a little bit more about that connection?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing about shame is shame, I think for almost every human, we have a shame in some way tied to sexuality and our own sexual expression, regardless of whatever that is. So the thing about shame is that it's this shadowy energy, and we might think, oh, well, I'm putting that away in a closet right now, or I'm not dealing with that. But the truth is that shame affects every area of our life. So if we have shame around sexuality, which almost everybody does, and many, many of us have also experienced sexual trauma, which creates a shitload of shame as well, so heavy, it's going to affect every area of our life, including our business, including our bank account, including our willingness to put ourselves out there. That's a big thing that I often see with women, and clients that I work with is like, oh, I'm afraid of being seen. I'm afraid of coming across as salesy. I'm afraid of asking for something. And when we trace that back, it really, like, I've never met someone who it doesn't originate in some story of self-expression and shame. Mm-hmm. So as we start to, and even in the story, where I told of the, being 7 years old and that little boy kind of shutting me down, is that energy goes right down into my really like sexual energy center, my sense of self, and is like, you're not appropriate. And that gets projected onto every experience in my life. So as we clean up, so to speak, as we heal, as we reclaim our own sexuality, as women, as men, as a culture, there is a unleashing, for lack of a better word, of energy, of potentiality, of desire, of passion that, I mean, if I give you an example, a lot of times as people are afraid to say, ask for the business or to put themselves out there. And once we feel more solid in who we are, confident in who we are, that story starts to clear up. And so people will actually take better action in their life. And on the energetic side of it, that shame is, a message that's being sent out to the universe, so to speak. People can feel that when they meet you. They're like, something's off about this person. As we clear that up, we actually become more magnetic. It's a term that you hear a lot these days, like the magnetic woman or magnetic man. And it's like, well, what is that really? And it doesn't have anything to do with like, what does somebody look like? It's really their energy. And what's the energy of somebody who's magnetic? Well, they're more open, they're self-accepting, that shame has been released. And just on the other side of it too, I mean, the creative current in the universe, where is that coming from? It's the sexual current. Mm-hmm. And so as we tap into our own sexuality, whether we're in relationship or not, it's really then we have more access to natural energy and to creative energy in our lives. Napoleon Hill devoted a whole chapter in Think and Grow Rich to the power of sexuality. I think that's very interesting. So, I could go on and on about this, but it really comes down to the shame that we often have around self-expression and magnetism, and just the field of energy. Like, how do we feel emboldened, impassioned in our life?
Yeah. And, you talk there about how like shame can prevent us from making offers and putting ourselves out there. But even, what I found, like for myself personally in the past and working with clients, working with different women throughout the years, even and connecting with different women and seeing other women making offers and putting themselves out there. Sometimes even if we feel able to do that, if we move through some of the shame and we can put ourselves out there and we can make the offers, like unconsciously, that shame is still in play. And like you said, people can pick up on that, can't they? Mm-hmm. So sometimes you can think, I'm doing all the things, but it's just not working because there is that shame that's still there.
Yeah. And I in your work with authors, I mean, it's like, gosh, what are we doing? Really digging into this area of self-expression. I mean, I remember writing my book, which of course is about sexuality. So it's like a really deep dive into my own shame patterns. But I had this voice in my head, and it's so funny when I think about it now. It was like, I can't write this book. I can't talk about this. My husband's family is going to judge me. And now I'm like, whoa, like you almost didn't do this because you had this story about one or two people in your life who you thought could judge you. And the truth was they didn't. And even if they had, I would have been fine. But that fear of rejection, that fear of being shamed, of judged, like it can really shut us down as entrepreneurs and businesswomen, but as artists, and really like that voice of spirit that wants to come through us. And shame is just nasty. It just gets in there and tells us all these false stories and just shuts us down. It's doing the work of the critic in our own head. And so I think really examining this piece around shame, having the support to do that is so critical in anything that we're creating in our life.
Absolutely. And, for people listening, Shasta, what's a good starting point or a good practice that we can get into that can help us to move through this shame and to release this shame?
Such a great question. The thing about shame is that it often is an unconscious story. Like we don't even know. We are following what we think is true, and we're following what we think is a reality. And so what I say to people, my students and clients, is the first thing is to just really notice where in your life are you not having the results that you want? First thing, notice where in your life do you not have the results that you say you want? And if you don't have the results you say you want, then there is always a limiting belief. And the limiting belief always comes, always to either guilt or shame. I'm ashamed of doing that. I fear judgment, which is shame. So the first thing is we have to actually get conscious of the unconscious. That in and of itself is hugely transformative. And everybody, because people will say, well, how do I know what my unconscious stories are? They're friggin' unconscious. And I'm like, I totally get it. So you have to look at your results. If you're getting same old, as I told you earlier, the men that I was attracting would just be like, it was a shit show. And, what's the common denominator? Me. And I have to say, what thought do I have going on here? I have to get conscious to the results in my life. So that will give you a good indicator where to start to look. And then the second thing that I always say to people is really look at the internal stories, like whose voice is speaking, what's the story that they're telling you. And when you just kind of stop and look at those things, it's actually really, really obvious. It's like I can hear that 7-year-old boy in my head at times going, you're a stupid bitch. And I have to say, I am consciously rejecting that voice. But I used to let that voice kind of run on a loop unconsciously. So again, super quick, look at the results in your life, see, if I'm not getting what I want, there's some sort of shame going on. And two is to really start to pay attention to what is the internal voice around what you're allowed to have, who you're allowed to be, et cetera, and to start to examine that. And then I honestly think, that all of us, there's no shame in getting support, because the thing about this is we're normally blind to this, like there's shit that I thought was just true and real. And I couldn't even see a different way until I, got support. I've always had a mentor. I've always had a teacher to help me move through these things. And gosh, the collapse of struggle and time, because someone could point out, this is your false beliefs. So never any shame in getting support and doing these things.
Absolutely. And that, the ability to allow yourself, or the willingness to allow yourself to be supported, it's another form of intimacy, isn't it? To allow somebody else into our kind of our inner space, our inner world. It's it all helps to send those messages to ourselves and out into the universe that yes, I am open, I'm willing to receive, I'm willing to be supported. It's really, really powerful. Shasta, oh my goodness, there's so many questions I didn't get to ask you. So much has come up, so I think we probably will have to have another conversation at some point.
Oh, that'd be lovely.
Yeah, fantastic. But can you just let us know, for people who are listening, and they want to find out more about you and what you do, what's the best way for them to do that?
So my website is very simple, shastatownsend.com. I'm also on Instagram at shasta.townsend, where I post a lot around feminine entrepreneurship and intimacy. And reach out. I'd love to connect with people. And again, Nicola, I'm so grateful to be here and all the work that you're doing, and everyone who's watching, just keep going. It's really inspiring. We are a movement of women who are, changing the family pattern, changing the dialogue. And I'm so, so grateful to be, a small part of that.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much for being with me today and having this conversation. And like you said, everyone who's doing this work, everyone who's listening, we are all part of this movement. And absolutely, I believe when we come together, we do become more, and we do have, although at times it can feel, oh, can I actually change something as one person? When we come together, we absolutely can. So thank you so much for the work you're doing, Shasta, as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, we will see you soon. Thank you for joining us and watching today and listening. And I will see you next week for the next episode of Unbound. Thank you, Shasta.